one replicate it?
I love these great questions. So the thing that people use to detract from his experiment is this thing called ionized wind, where when you have, so this basic experiment is basically this capacitor experiment. So you have a negative electrode, you have a positive electrode, you have what's called a high K dielectric in between the two. So it's something that stores a lot of electromagnetic charge and discharges easily. And you put that in a vacuum chamber, and then you pump it full of megavolt range electricity, and you see this thrust from the negative to the positive. And so that seems simple, right? So your question is an amazing one, which is like, why hasn't somebody recreated that? The thing that people use to explain the thrust away is this thing called electrohydrodynamics, where you're creating ionized air, and that ionized air has an opposite reaction, which creates thrust in the direction of the positive electrode. So if you just did this experiment not in a vacuum chamber, I could just say that's ionized air, that doesn't break physics, whatever. If you do that in a vacuum chamber where there is no air that can get ionized, then all of a sudden it starts to get really interesting, because you're saying that you are connecting, again, electromagnetism and gravity, because there is no air to get ionized. So the air can't, basically account for the thrust. Here's the thing. Industrial grade vacuum chambers are very expensive. They're prohibitively expensive. They cost at least $200K, $300K. It is very easy to stigmatize a thing basically away from like an average person in their garage, from trying it. And then on top of that, like, who has the discretionary money to do this experiment in
tons of labs around the world, like professional institutions, universities, billionaires, anybody that wants to support. Like, if Elon could do this, why isn't SpaceX doing this?
He should. And I think there's some sort of undetectable dark matter there or something. But the lead electrostatic, I don't know, but there's the lead electrostatics guy at NASA. He runs their electrostatics lab. The most senior scientist in electrostatics at NASA works at Cape Kennedy. He has had access to a vacuum chamber for the last 20 years. He has left, he's either left NASA or he's spending most of his time now on a private company called Exodus Space. That company, Exodus Space, uses basically a derivative of the Byfield-Brown effect, the Townsend-Brown experiment, and he says that it creates thrust. So I think, again, the answer to your question is they have. This guy with serious credentials has. He says it creates newtons or millinewtons of thrust, which in space is a very big deal. If you create any thrust, again, theoretically, you are breaking the standard model. You are breaking physics in this very big way. So I think they have. There have been a couple of Air Force replications of this where they, quote unquote, debunk the thing. I think one by this guy named Tally in the 90s where they used 13 kilovolts. But Brown was using megavolt range electricity, and that was really important for the amount of thrust he got. So
it seems like so primitive to be doing it in the 50s.
Yes.
And then to never be able to replicate it. It just seems like there's some fuckery going on there, or there's something wrong in the calculation.
I think it will get replicated in our lifetime, and I think it will. I think it will be vindicated, and it will get replicated.
Do you think that when I think about physics, I don't think about physical physics all that much. I think about theoreticians. I think about Blackboard. I think about trying to solve different equations. Would it be a bigger deal for the theoreticians to solve this issue, or for the experimentalists to solve this issue?
I think the way you'd have to get something like this done would be you need a theoretical physicist present with typical credentials or something, and then they need to check exactly, because I've seen videos of people who are like, I'm doing this and stuff, but they don't have the traditional credentials, and then you're not allowed to look into this stuff if you have the credentials. I truly think you cannot underestimate the ability to mind control very smart people. I mean it. And there's this amazing philosophy of science guy named Thomas Kuhns, and he talks about the structure of scientific revolutions, and he talks about scientific revolutions being more politically driven often than they are about truth. Who's the guy who figured out that our solar system revolved around the sun? Do you know?
Copernicus.
Right there. That would have been
So actually, it's a trick question. this guy named Aristarchus, who is an obscure third century BC Greek theoretician who is a contemporary of Archimedes and Euclid. And he was forgotten because that was never accepted until the 16th century, and Copernicus decided that was, going to be the case. And then even with Copernicus, he said that, and then Galileo, a century later, actually measured it, and then Galileo was burnt at the stake. So I truly...
Conceptual inertia is a hell of a limitation.
It is, and history is moved forward by the heretics. And I think if you can't name a present heretic where you believe in some of their opinions, then you're probably, in some sense, on the wrong side of history. If you can't name somebody who is sort of disagreeable or a pariah in some sense because of a view they have that they're high conviction in, then I think you're probably not being independent thinking enough.
Oh, that's a really interesting model that I've never thought of before. Why do you think it is then that the renegade scientist is so highly criticized by the establishment, by people in academia? Pick your favorite YouTube channel or podcast that kind of does the critique sphere thing of choice and points the finger at this stuff. Is it a sense that we have sort of got the scientific method now, and there's kind of a bit of solipsism that comes along with that, which is no, yeah, maybe before there were things that a great man of science history could have found that would have made step change jumps forward in understanding. But now we understand things need to be falsifiable, they need to fit within an existing model. We're making changes through sort of iteration as opposed to leap.
Yes.
Is that maybe a part
That's
of it?
exactly right. And the ironic thing is, if you were to snapshot end of the 19th century, England or something, you would be saying the exact same thing about electromagnetism. You would literally be saying the exact same thing immediately pre-quantum revolution. And so our physical models of reality are always going to be wrong. There's a great book by a guy named Sam Arbesman called The Half-Life of Facts, where he talks about facts themselves as kind of being similar to radioactive isotope decay. They have a decay function. Our physical models of reality are always wrong. So I would bet, you always want to bet on the anomaly. You don't want to bet on the model, right? There's this thing called black body radiation, where you'd have this, black cylindrical object, and you'd heat it up, and you'd expect this ultraviolet catastrophe. And this guy named Gustav Kirchhoff, this German scientist, and he discovered this in the 1860s. And it was this anomaly because it was why doesn't it, blow up or whatever? And then you realize that the photons exponentially downgrade, the frequency or something at really high temperatures. You needed quanta to do that. And that was in the early 19th century, or that was in the early 20th century with Max Planck. And so, and the orbit of Mercury is another thing, where it's it didn't make any sense actually in the Newtonian model, and then you figure out Einstein's space-time curvature, and then all of a sudden it made sense. So, if I'm on the UFO side, right, and I'm debating against Neil deGrasse Tyson, he's kind of sorry to make him a punching bag, but he's like the priestly citadel, right? And he's saying, you are wrong, Jesse, because of physical models of reality. Historically, the person behind the anomaly is going to be right. The person observing the anomaly. And then the anomalies systematically build up, and it's like pressure behind a dam. And then the dam explodes, and all of a sudden you need this, whole new theory to encapsulate present anomalies. So I think if we were truly open-minded about all this sort of data, I've had a debate with Michael Shermer, for example, who's famous scientific skeptic. These debates always go the same way. Joe Rogan's had a bunch of them, right? Where it's Graham Hancock and Flint Dibble or whatever. Person who believes a bunch of, anomalous stuff, and they have a bunch of data around the anomalous stuff. It's the UFOs and nukes thing, or Younger Dryas Impact type of, there's always person believing that, and then person who is so kind of smug they won't even look at the data, and it's two trains passing in the night. The person on the the right hand, the kind of the heretic or whatever, I'm not saying they're right all the time, but they're doing a thing that probably will move history forward if it gets accepted or incorporated into the model. The guy's just defending the Citadel. It's like we are over-indexed. You know, the famous early 20th century German sociologist Max Weber, he would say, you know, we live in the age of disenchantment. We are over-indexed on skepticism. You don't need another skeptic. Like, do we need another person saying, like, string theory is great, you're wrong because you're too much of a renegade or whatever? No. Like, we want to, like, science is only useful insofar as it has predictive value, A, and B, you can build cool shit with it. Like, that's it. Like, name another thing. You know, or like, the other thing that people would say is it ontologically maps reality, but again, I just think that is a fool's errand to say that it's not. It's the map. It's not the territory. So the people here, you know, on the left-hand side, the skeptics, they have the hubris to think that our current physical models of reality are reality itself. And that just feels so ahistorical. It's just wrong. It's historically wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely a signature demeanor that I don't think encourages people to take risks with the way that they think and the sort of research that they do and the ideas that they have. And yeah, you're right. I would, you know, to fly a flag as somebody who moved from a country which is highly skeptical, quite cynical, quite sort of tall poppy-ish, to one which is basically permanent first-line cocaine energy. Enthusiasm. I much prefer this because I think it helps to sort of foster a sense of self-belief and self-esteem and hope and like, yeah, I'm going to try it, I'm going to take that chance, I'm going to try and do that thing, and it's why new, cool, interesting ideas come up with. And yeah, you're right, even if most of them are wrong, I don't know, there's this idea, I think it's called the Oxford Manner, which is the ability to play gracefully with ideas. And that seems to have been very lost.
I love that.
Yeah, the ability to play gracefully with ideas. I think it's a lovely sort of way to think about a good faith discussion between two different people. And a lot of the time it gets into some sort of slanging match about like how ridiculous this person is. And,
yes.
And sort of meanness and I understand why. I had a really interesting conversation with Richard Reeves. He's the president, founder of the American Institute for Boys and Men. And we were talking about how when people's beliefs for something that they really, really care about are not listened to, what they typically do is become more ardent, more of a firebrand.
Yes.
And a good example of this would be people that think climate change is a real existential risk. I'm just going to put it out there now. I used to tweet this about once every 6 months. Climate change is not an existential risk priority. It simply isn't. I think it's a big deal. I think we should pay attention to it. All of those things. I think that there should be an awful lot of very, very smart people paying attention to it. And yet, it is not a real existential risk priority. Permanent, unrecoverable collapse, not going to happen.
Yes.
We just had a fucking pandemic a few years ago,
Yes.
and yet we're still back. Who is talking about bioweapon facilities? Who is talking about engineered viruses?
Yeah.
Who is that concerned about the alignment problem in AI or about nanotechnology?
The NIH wants to fund gain of function again. It's fucking crazy.
So I understand why people who have a cause that they're pushing for, one that I agree in, although I don't think that the sort of velocity or magnitude is accurate. If people aren't listening, you raise your voice. You say things in a louder, more vociferous, more aggressive manner because, like, no, this really, really, really matters. You know, remember Don't Look Up? It's like they start screaming at the people on the TV, like, and I was talking to Richard Reeves about this, and he was talking about how really, really interesting dynamic that I think is super important. And, you know, I would probably try and counsel Eric to take heed of this dynamic, which is when you have something that you believe in a lot and other people don't believe in it and may even be pretty sort of mean and critical and stuff about it, you have to be able to keep a smile on your face and put the idea forward in the same level of sort of charming manner, because when you become more aggressive with the way that you put things across, it just makes you sound more crazy.
100%.
It turns people off. And it's the difference between, do you want to prove your position for your own sense of recognition, or is your your goal the actual position. Ben Francis, founder of Gymshark, said that a company will become successful when your goals for the company outstrip your goals for yourself.
Love that.
And it's him saying he had to he was founder CEO, stepped down as CEO, came back in as CEO, moved across to chief product officer, came back to CEO. You know, it's because he is just in service of the thing.
Yeah.
And the problem is that naturally you care about this thing. Like it's a part of you. It feels like a sense of self. It's like very, very tightly attached to who you are. And someone's attacking that, they're attacking you, which means that you feel like you need to, hey, this is really, really important, and you're not fucking listening, and you need to listen, and you're, dude, you sound crazy.
Yes.
And we saw it with, I think, a great video by Charlie Hoopert comparing Peterson's appearance on Kathy Newman, like, gotcha, like that one in 2019, and his one on Jubilee recently.
Right. Oh man, that was rough.
Yeah, and I think that the roughest part about it was nothing to do with logical consistencies or fallacies or, you know, whatever, and almost exclusively to do with demeanor.
Sure.
You know, you have somebody who's sitting back, who's laughing. I think that's silly.
Yeah.
I think that's silly. I really do. I think that's, I think you're being silly. And you're like, fuck, like, I want to listen.
Yes.
I want to listen to this person. He's regulated. It's this. As opposed to, and I understand the arc, like, dude, if you've had to try and get off benzos and been attacked for the last half decade, it's going to be tough to regulate yourself, right? And I mean, you are literally surrounded by, 25 people who all think that you're a piece of shit.
Yeah.
I get that. But just my sort of broader point here is when someone has a belief they care about an awful lot and people don't listen, they get more aggressive, which actually pushes away the very thing that they want.
Yeah.
Which is for them to understand it. And I think it's like it's an impossible lesson. I struggle with it all the time. But, you know, it's something
Eddie,
important. If you
come on,
care
man,
about
give me
this thing,
something good.
it should be a reason for you to regulate more aggressively.
Totally.
Like, you need to step in and calm yourself down even more. Because if you don't care about it, like, do what you want.
Yeah.
You know? Like, you can be as flippant and shouty as you'd like.
Yes.
But if you really care about it, then it's like soft signal of
$4.85.
effectiveness.
I think science is supposed to be the thing that is most kind of immune from these sort of sociological factors, right? Like, you're not supposed to have any sort of bias. You're supposed to remove bias. You're like this kind of impartial observer. And if you read, like, you know, Richard Dawkins had these famous debates. He had debates with a bunch of people. I remember, you know, written correspondence between him and David Berlinski. David Berlinski was this guy who believed there are all these sort of anomalies worthy of inquiry or whatever in natural selection. And just the shrillness on, honestly, both sides, but especially on the Dawkins side, it was, you know, it is kind of off-putting. And I think if you have real confidence in your beliefs, you shouldn't have that. You should just be kind of, you know, chill and, you know, it's all good. And we shouldn't pre-crystallize knowledge. Like, if somebody came to me and was like, Jesse, actually, we have this aerial spoofing tech. And in conjunction with that, we have this, like, psychotronic tech. And we can get people to see a thing, and then the craft can come down, and it creates this kind of Close Encounters of the Third Kind where you see the beings and you get microchipped, but it's all this cover for MK Ultra or whatever. I'd be like, I need to hear more about that. Like, tell me the thing that explains away the data that I'm discussing. But I fully agree with you. I think not pre-crystallizing knowledge and just like first base is there a phenomena that's real that's going on?
good.
And then but that's not interesting. The interesting thing is, what is the metaphysical version of reality? Like, I love your question, like, how do these things fly? Like, I don't know, but let's discuss that. Like, that's the most interesting stuff. The root of the word school in its original Greek, schole, is skole. The double meaning is leisure. And leisurely there's a great book called Leisure is the Basis of Culture. Leisurely contemplation of the universe and of the world in the sort of Oxford, you know, gentlemanly tradition where if you were in 19th century Oxford, if you got straight A's, that was a bad move because you'd be stigmatized. You were supposed to effortlessly get B's in Victorian England.
No way.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, the ability to play gracefully with ideas, dude. Like,
Yes.
and I think I get it. We need a external stress test to ensure that wacky or seductive but wildly incorrect theories don't gain more traction than they need, because that detracts away from the things that are actually true and
Of course.
accurate. But there is a balance to this, and it is if your ability to criticize
Almost had
is
all
greater
ours,
than your ability to create,
which
I
never
think that
happens.
you are leaning on the wrong side.
Yes.
Like, how much are you contributing to stuff, and how much are you critiquing stuff? And if you're more on the side
get
of
some
criticism,
hearts
well,
popping up,
perhaps
never
maybe
means
that's the
anything,
job of
it's
some
just like
scientist. I'm
bad
sure some
luck.
smart person that
feel
does
like hearts
fucking
popping
journal
up is
review would
bad
be able to
luck,
say
so
that.
it matters.
Maybe, I don't know. I just,
Even if you play like 1,000
it doesn't foster
games,
sort of a positive
it's
some
still bad
environment
luck.
for me in that sort of a way. You've mentioned a couple of times you've got an issue with Elon's rocket-based model of space exploration. What's the problem with how Elon's trying to explore space, and then what would a workable version of space travel actually look like?
I find myself with Elon, in between sort of a Scylla and Charybdis, like two failure modes. Like one is the failure mode of like people saying he's like totally worthless and not impressive, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Like he literally like. NASA started to fail, and this guy created a private version of NASA that started to work. He flew to Russia, where they had liquid fuel rocket engines, and single-handedly resuscitated the American space program. So I will caveat that. And then electric cars, thank you, Elon. Like, a successful car company hadn't been started, for 100 years or something pre-Tesla. So very impressive dude. I wish we had more, people like that. The other side is like Elon is solving all of the world's most important problems. It's interstellar travel. Even with the electric car stuff, it's like, the mining cobalt's like not the most humane thing in the world, and the batteries end up in landfills, and so like I'm of the mind that like a lot of incremental progress is still worthy for like the ultimate thing you want to get to. Like SpaceX and Tesla are extremely worthwhile endeavors, but you have to think clearly about some of this stuff. So SpaceX, because we're talking about UFOs, again, if you wanted to get to the nearest habitable planet, that's 80,000, 100,000 years. That just doesn't make sense, right? And you need new science. You need new theory. Like you need. He was on Joe Rogan's show, and Rogan was like, what if there's some new propulsion modality? What if it's not just Newton's 3 laws? And he was like, there can't be. Or whatever. It's only mass ejection. That's the only thing. The thing ejects the mass, the fuel, and then it goes up, equal and opposite reaction. And I just think that puts a lid on like what some young STEM students like watching that, and it's like, again, if you were to bet against the present physical models of reality at any given time, which you should, that's the safe bet. You shouldn't put that lid on things. And then there's the idea of like the moon and Mars. The moon is ambitious enough, so. Starship, which is they're like 150 to 200 ton rocket ship that takes us hopefully to the moon. So that thing burns 9/10 of the fuel tank just to get to low Earth orbit. Then it's floating around low Earth orbit with 1/10 of the fuel tank. You then have to get another Starship to go up, burn 9/10 of its fuel tank. It does butt-to-butt refueling with the first. That one discards itself, deorbits or whatever. And then you end up like 10 launches later, you end up with a full fuel tank of, Starship in low Earth orbit, and then it goes to the moon. And like, we have to get it to work. It's orbited in LEO before, but we need to get it to work at a base case. I think we just upgraded the amount of Raptor engines from 33 to 36. Like, it's still like a total work in progress. So like, that should like implement some humility, for people thinking about this stuff. And then Mars is like not super habitable. Like, there's no oxygen, right? So like, you need like widespread like nuclear energy, like some power source that's like really workable there. Like we can barely get that stuff done here. Like, the Earth is great, right? It's like a really good like biome. It's not bad. I love what you said about climate change. There's a great, this guy James Lovelock has this Gaia theory. The resilience, the Earth is extremely resilient through cataclysms and all sorts of, pandemics and stuff. So it almost devalues Earth a little bit. It's like we have to remove Earth as some central point of failure. It is this very Silicon Valley level of thinking, but I think that can be overrated. It's also overrated when he thinks about AI as well, because he talks about AI as like, so he got really into Nick Bostrom's Superintelligence, this book in 2012.
I love it.
It's a good book, but I think it's sort of wrong. It's wrong in the way that Bostrom and Elon took its implications. So like, they were like, we're gonna end up with some hard takeoff of AGI at some point. We're going to end up with, AI will like gain sentience. They'll realize that in, meat space, biology is sort of super inefficient. They'll kill us all, due to the sentience. Or the paperclip problem, paperclip maximizer, alignment issues, And those are issues, don't get me wrong. But then their answer to that issue was, if you can't beat him, join him. So then you have to merge the AI with us, with, something like Neuralink, which I would actually bet on the merging of us and AI more than I'd bet on AGI. Like, if you look at the history of computation, it is the human body and computers developing a lower latency and higher bandwidth interface over the last 70 years. Like, you used to need a CS degree to work a mainframe computer the size of literally this room at IBM.
Natural language processing in a phone in your pocket.
And that's it. And so it's becoming more and more black box, lower latency and higher bandwidth. Would I bet that, like, the logical conclusion of that is a chip in your brain? Like, yeah. Like, is you just order Postmates, like, I want a cheeseburger or whatever, I guess, Like, that's, that makes sense to me, right? But I think that kills humanity with a whimper and not a bang. Like, one of my favorite quotes is Marshall McLuhan, every media extension of man is an amputation. And so we assume that, like, the IT revolution augments, human abilities, just like from spears to planes, all, physical technology, which does augment, all of that stuff really, really helps us. We're talking about nuclear energy. That would be amazing. But, like, the IT stuff really parasitizes us. It really, like you don't need a sense of direction. You don't need a sense of recall or memory or any of this stuff anymore. Synthesizing information via ChatGPT.
External buttress. There's some interesting studies that have come out looking at students who use ChatGPT to help them write essays, and their amount of recall compared with the students that didn't. Shock horror. It's like 10%.
Yes.
10 or 20% as much as if you'd done it yourself.
Totally. So the PSYOP, in my opinion, I don't think it's an intentional PSYOP, but it's like, if you were to create a PSYOP, it would be like, oh, the evil AGI, like, we're going to get some hard takeoff, the iRobot scenario. It's like Will Smith and the robots, they wake up and they want to just, like, destroy us all. I think if you really look at this stuff, it's statistics on steroids, building a nerve agent with off-the-shelf components, very scary. Alignment stuff, very scary. Autonomous warfare systems, very scary. All of that stuff's very scary. The Nick Bostrom, pie in the sky, AGI, like, they turn on us. I don't think so. And then the solution to that being chip in the brain, like, what? Like, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. I've got Eliezer Yudkowsky coming on.
Oh, wow.
That'll be interesting. Bostrom was on last year talking about digital utopia, which was kind of his inverse of superintelligence. Superintelligence is what if it goes wrong. Digital utopia was what if it goes right.
Interesting.
But interestingly, in a sort of classic philosopher's manner, he'd managed to look at what if it goes right and what would be wrong with it. It was like a study of what's wrong with if it goes right. But yeah, I think superintelligence was seminal, and to have a book that was a New York Times bestseller and is that, like, like, difficult to get through in some ways, like, dense. It's a very dense book, but fascinating. It's kind of like the Dark Souls of the popular science reading world, that it was such a fucking tough slog, but it was obviously really impactful, and it was born out of, like, the Less Wrong and the Scott Alexander-y world of the Robin Hanson-y type thing, and like peak rationalist movement type stuff. But it just didn't end up having that much predictive power.
Yeah.
It didn't predict LLMs. It didn't predict sort of the model that was going to at least be the ascendant one now. And, come 2018, when I started the show, I was fucking fascinated, dude. I had Stuart Russell on, who wrote Human Compatible, also the guy that wrote the textbook for AI, right? It was translated into fucking a gazillion languages and used all around the world. And I'm super obsessed by all of this stuff. I tried to get Toby Ord on the show like a gazillion times, and that didn't fucking work. And that future didn't really come to pass in that way. And we, at least for now, given that pretty much all of the outcomes were atrocious, we can say that was probably a good thing.
Yes.
Right? I'm glad that he wasn't Cassandra, because it would have been a real problem if he was.
Yes.
But yeah, I don't think it had the predictive power, maybe, that we might have thought. And it just goes to show that even the people who are balls deep in the research of these things often can't see. And that was only 10 years,
Yeah.
10, 11 years ago.
Totally.
And it's been, I mean, LLMs kind of had been around for a little while. I think it was like 2010 when that's...
Deep learning was like around that time, and then Transformers were 2018. So it was like, yeah.
Yeah,
well,
okay. I don't know. It's just, it's an interesting one to see what are the other unknown unknowns that are going to sort of come about, even in fields where there's super smart people that are really thinking deeply about this and have got armies of high IQ autists in internet forums, like really fucking contributing to this, and they're scraping it and thinking about it, and they've got all of these people in a council. So, I don't know, man. And I think that that's where having the Oxford Manor and Renegade Theories and allowing those to at least have a seat at the table every so often is useful, because it's evident that by iteration stuff doesn't always get predicted correctly, and it's like orthogonal moves,
Always.
like up instead of left or right.
Yes. It's always the sort of adjacent surprise. The only guarantee about the future is that it will surprise you. And it's, I mean, the armchair pundit is always wrong. So I think all of these things need to be super loosely held. And I love the way you should comport yourself is what you said, with real, epistemic humility and collegiality with anybody talking about this stuff. Because it's ultimately, a lot of this stuff too is like, it's like a theological debate. Like you could kind of guess based on somebody's like big five personality traits, or like the way they think about things generally, like where they're going to shake out on especially issues like AI or UFOs, where like these are issues where, I like to think the more you know, the more you know. And I do feel like I probably know more than the average person, but it's almost the more you know, the less you know in some sense too. It's like, they're extremely, they touch on really deep truths about reality where we're groping in the dark and we just don't ultimately know. And so I think that everybody should sort of comport themselves accordingly.
What ways might you be wrong when it comes to the UFO stuff?
I'm probably very wrong about a lot of it, but I try to, again, always like say I'm thinking probabilistically. So the idea that like phenomenologically there is something worthy of inquiry, where you have really credible people seeing stuff, we're getting like cross-sensor data, on that stuff. Is the data that we're getting, off of FLIR, for example, like the same thing people are seeing? In the case of Nimitz, it seemed like it, because you had eyewitnesses present, and then one of them, was, Chad Underwood was like literally managing, the FLIR sensor or whatever, and he's in the same craft as David Fravor, so he's in the same F-16. So, but I think you have to think in probabilities all the way down. So it's like that until like, in Area 51, we have a saucer that you can unveil. I can't say that in good faith, that for sure we have some sort of saucer that we can unveil, especially knowing that I think in the past, Ben Rich, who was the, president of Skunkworks in the 80s, used to call UFOs unfunded opportunities. And I think explicitly they've used UFOs as tech protection for other sort of, like the SR-71 Blackbird was like, that's a real stealth craft that's been unveiled now. The U-2 spy plane, all of these things were mistaken as UFOs back in the day. So I think a lot of this stuff is prosaically explainable.
What do you reckon, where do you put the probability of it being extraterrestrial versus secret tech that's human run for the phenomena that have been spotted in?
Well, this is what I love about, the show I run. It's like UFOs and all the titles. As you know, YouTube doesn't do well with nuance. So, but the way I really view what I'm doing is like I am flanking the truth. So like if I can be at the forefront of the anti-gravity stuff, because Elon said, it was really interesting. He always says there's nothing to see here. He jokes about the UFO thing. And then I think it was with Tucker. He was like, we have all these like pretty like impressive pilots coming out saying they've seen things. And then he goes, it was really interesting. He goes, actually, I think it's just American black military ops. It's like these special access programs. That is a huge statement from Elon, because he's basically, unless he's saying that we have some sort of weird visual spoofing technology, which I don't think he was saying that, then he's saying that we have some sort of like anomalous propulsion modality that SpaceX isn't using. So he kind of painted himself into a corner there. So that's what I view. That I mean, I truly think the show is like at the forefront of like the gravity stuff with Townsend Brown, with what happened at the Chapel Hill Conference in 1957, and the creation of quantum gravity and all of that stuff. And then also this like weird anomalous stuff that people are seeing in the sky. And then the third kind of to make the iron triangle thing that I would say is consciousness, where it's the thing people can say the least about, but it's probably the most fundamental to everything when it comes to physics. And I think there are, anomalies and interesting things when it comes to consciousness that modern science can't account for. And I think if you can stay at the front of the conversation in those three things, you can sort of V formation or flank your way to the truth, triangulate the truth, if you will. But I try to be super epistemically humble about the Brown stuff and the gravity. It's like, I'm not sure. It's a really interesting fact pattern that I interviewed, deputy CTO of a spin out from Northrop Grumman, who they built the B-2 stealth bomber. And I said, in a room full of, this was like a Founders Fund conference, a ton of entrepreneurs and VCs, I was like, of any of this stuff, what is actionable? Because we were talking about UFOs in this sort of metaphysical sense. And he goes, watch Jesse's video on Thomas Townsend Brown. So to me, it's like, and I've had a lot of these experiences where I'm like, is anybody watching this interview that I'm doing? And like this guy's credentials, like he was a VP he helped set up Army Futures Command. And like ran a lot of the Army's most, tech modernization efforts. So he's like a very real guy when it comes to this stuff. So I feel like you can kind of flank the truth, if you will, and think about everything sort of probabilistically, but in aggregate, you come to this high probability that we might be on the verge of a paradigm shift, especially with conventional physics sort of eating itself alive, as we just discussed.
Yeah, that is interesting. Why is consciousness the third leg of this stool?
Yeah, well, I think consciousness is, it's always the problem of, Dave Chalmers would say it's like the hard problem of consciousness. It's like, you can't tell me I'm not a P zombie or whatever. Like, I could be like some computer algorithm. Like, I interviewed the Google whistleblower for Lambda around the AI stuff, and he was like, convinced that Lambda was conscious, and I was like, I think it's just math on steroids. I think it's statistics on steroids. He was like, no, it's conscious. But it turns into this theological debate where like there is no way to ultimately say whether something is conscious or not. But it's the most interesting thing about physics itself. Is it comporting itself to, or do we have an interface? And math and physics and all of the observable universe is sort of moving through this computational interface, or do you live in this perfectly Cartesian dualist universe where you are this measurement sensor, and then you have, the world around you as this kind of hard-coded, kind of fully fundamentally real thing. So like, this is a table, and like this is me, and like there's like no relationship outside of, like I'm just a measurement sensor of this like objective world. And there's no one on the conventional Citadel physics side who can say for sure that this debate has been, fully put to rest. There's no way to put it to rest. And if you look at a lot of the early quantum field theorists, guys like, von Neumann, who was known as the smartest guy at his time, he invented the mathematical underpinnings of quantum mechanics, but was a total polymath, a lot of modern computational principles. He and his, colleague Jonathan Wigner had a model of wave function collapse that involved the mind being part of wave function collapse. And just for the audience, for context, a wave function, which is governed, basically Schrodinger, is this mid-century scientist who basically came up with this equation that involves a wave function probability for where a subatomic particle might show up in some sort of eigenstate. And it's the square of the amplitude will define what eigenstate it collapses into. So all subatomic particles kind of exist probabilistically. They don't exist in these sort of discrete forms until you observe them. And so it's this sort of, particle wave duality or whatever. And so Wigner and von Neumann were like, actually the mind might have to do with wave function collapse at a certain point in their careers. Pauli flirted with this. Heisenberg, who is, again, in charge of a lot of, or responsible for a lot of quantum mechanics and ran the entire Nazi, nuke program, flirted with this. He has a great book called Life in Physics, where he sort of talks about these kind of more metaphysical discussions around how the mind might, be involved in this. Schrodinger himself was sort of against this, but if you look at, like, he had this lecture series called What is Life in 1944, and it was all around, consciousness's disproportionate impact on biology and how consciousness is sort of fundamental. He had a dog that he called Atman, based on the he had Atman and Brahman and, kind of Hindu mythology. He was extremely interested in the Upanishads. And so a lot of these early quantum field theorists or quantum mechanics theorists would flirt with the idea that the mind collapsed the wave function. And now, if you were to talk to a modern physicist, they would say, no, it's a quantum, in the double slit experiment, for example, it's the quantum detector. That's just the quantum detector. It doesn't matter whether an observer is present. They have no way to prove that. Like, the quantum detector might be holding a superposition of, measurements itself that the observer is then, measuring. There's literally no way to prove it. And while physics has went into this, like, cul-de-sac, a la string theory and a lot of the discussions we're having, you have these really interesting fields of study that have popped up at pretty much every elite university in the U.S., or a lot of them. At Duke, they had the Ryan Institute, Stanford Research Institute, UCLA, Princeton Engineering and Anomalous Research Lab. All of these guys, in one form or another, studied what's known as parapsychology, which is, in its most rudimentary form, that the mind affects wave function collapse. None of the scientists that engaged in these sorts of experiments came out thinking that the mind didn't affect it and there wasn't some sort of interface. It's really interesting. Like, the guy who ran the Princeton Engineering and Anomalous Research Lab is in charge of, he's responsible for some modern plasma propulsion that are still used in satellites today. He was dean of the Princeton Engineering School. His name is Bob John, and he wrote a whole book called I think it was Marginal Realities or something, and it was about how, like, there's some mental interface with the wave function, and he came up with a whole model, a physicalist model around how this might occur. In conventional physics, it's pretty much Roger Penrose is, like, sitting out on he's like the only guy, like, completely, out on a limb, saying that there's this thing called orchestrated objective reduction. Maybe the microtubules collapse the wave function. But you have all these elite universities mid-century that said we got weak but very real and statistically significant effects around the mind, affecting the wave function in this experiment known as random event generators, where you have a super rudimentary computer. So it's a computer that produces ones and zeros. You tie it to something that's conventionally thought of as random in quantum mechanics, or something like radioactive isotope decay, or a double slit experiment where you expect the same, 50-50 distribution of, both slits or whatever. And you have an observer come in, walk into the room, and you're seeing ones and zeros being produced on a graphical interface that's tied to this provably random thing. So it's literally the perfect digital coin flip, right? You'd expect over a long enough time scale with some standard deviation, expected standard deviation, the same amount of ones and zeros. All of these people got a statistically significant standard deviation with this experiment. And this is where it gets really crazy. The CIA had this sort of remote viewing, program from, again, the 70s to the 90s, where they were using remote viewing as a really important intelligence modality. In fact, the top remote viewer is a guy named Joseph McMoneagle, and he won what's known as the Legion of Merit for over 200 instances in which he helped aid American intel with his insights that were drawn up psychically. Jimmy Carter, at the end of his presidency, said the craziest thing he'd ever experienced in his presidency. He's on record saying this. You can hear the audio. He says a woman named Rosemary Smith, they were looking for a Tu-22 Russian spy plane, or cargo plane rather, that had fallen below the treetops somewhere in Africa. And this woman circled a 3 square mile radius in Zaire, and they found the plane. So this was studied at the highest levels of the government. The CIA then contracted a woman who's still alive today, Jessica Utts, to do a statistical analysis, Huberman-style meta-study, on this sort of stuff. She went on to become the president of the American Statistical Association in 2016. So you can go argue with the American Statistical Association president. I'm not going to. And she came out being like, if this methodology and this level of skepticism and scrutiny were applied to any other field of science, it would be accepted immediately. Like the other field would be accepted immediately. Because of the stigma, this field is not accepted.
Why is there so much stigma?
I think it's manufactured. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I truly, I wish people sort of looked at this more. I mean, now it's starting to the dam is starting to break, like, thanks to, it's like Rogan and Sean Ryan and all these guys. It's like there's all these like government whistleblowers coming out being like, the government's actually way weirder than you think, and we experience all these like trippy things inside of it. So I do think the dam is breaking somewhat, but I don't know why, why people aren't more open-minded.
Is this related to the telepathy tapes? Have you seen those?
Yes, it's perfectly related to the telepathy tapes. It's yes. So the telepathy tapes is a podcast that surpassed all podcasts, Modern Wisdom, Joe Rogan, everything. It was for a little bit. It was like for a month or something. It was the #1 podcast in America, and it was all these autistic, nonverbal children across the United States saying, basically, repeatedly showing, and I should caveat this. This was not done in double-blind settings, so this needs to be done. Simultaneous to that, I think anybody that listens to all the tapes and you're reasonably open-minded will say there's obviously something going on that's interesting here, where they'll have, the mother in another room generating, an image on an iPad, and then the son or daughter, the autistic nonverbal kid in another room, totally isolated, they'll see some image pop up, and like not even statistically significant. Like 19 out of 20 times they'll know what the image the mother or father are seeing. And often it's they call it remote perception, because it's actually the mind meld that's more fundamental than them just being able to see something in objective time space. It's their ability to kind of meld with their parents, which kind of makes sense. Like you interviewed Rupert Sheldrake, I remember a few years ago. A lot of that kind of lines up with that sort of anecdotal, it's not anecdotal, I mean experimental findings. He doesn't have amazing theories. I would say the morphic resonance stuff it's a sort of a placeholder theory, but he's not a bad empiricist. Like the experimental protocols aren't bad. So these kids they'll meet up on this telepathic hill and they'll talk to each other and they'll exchange information. It's this fascinating thing. And I do think there are more high agency people interested in this stuff and who have studied it rigorously than meet the eye. Like, I'll give you an example. My closest mentor runs a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, and he's impressive in that context, like a high performer in that context. He is good at computer science. He probably has like a 200 IQ or something. Like really, really smart dude. He helped Bob John, the guy I mentioned, the Princeton Engineering and Anomalous Research guy. He helped him run the lab for 10 years. And he is the highest integrity guy I know. He is fully high conviction on these random event generator experiments. And he would say, he would bring the physicists from, Princeton into the lab, and he'd say, look, like this is really important. This is like breaking your models. And they would say stuff like, oh no, it's like a file drawer issue or survivorship bias, like all the kind of heuristics that you would use to like break a scientific experiment. And he would go through each thing line by line, like, no, it's not file drawer. We accounted for that with this. No, it's not survivorship bias. We accounted for it with this. No, it's really cohort wide, and we controlled for all these other things. Like, extremely. If you met this guy, you'd be very impressed by him. And